The research station hung in the darkness of space like a metal flower waiting to bloom, and inside its curved walls, 12 species had gathered to discuss a problem that none of them could solve. Overseer Kethril stood at the center of the council chamber with his forearms folded behind his back, and his silver eyes moved across the assembled representatives as he prepared to deliver news that would trouble them all. We have spent 3 full cycles studying humanity, he announced in a voice that echoed through the chamber. And I must confess that our findings make no sense at all. The Valtteri scientist touched a panel on his wrist, and a massive holographic display appeared above the council table, showing charts and graphs and numbers that filled the air with blue light. Their ships are slower than ours by a significant margin, and their weapons lack the power of even our most basic armaments, while their bodies are soft and fragile compared to most species in this coalition. Director Yunshara leaned forward in her seat, her pale blue skin catching the light from the display as she studied the data with growing concern. Then why do they keep winning? She asked in a quiet voice that carried across the silent chamber. Kethril's silver eyes flickered with something that might have been frustration or perhaps fear. That is precisely what we cannot determine, Director, because every simulation we run shows that humanity should lose against superior forces. Yet the historical record tells a completely different story. He waved one of his 4 hands through the hologram, and new images appeared showing battle after battle, conflict after conflict, all ending the same way. In every real engagement throughout their short history in space, humans have won battles they mathematically should have lost. And we have no explanation for this phenomenon. The Drethkai representative rose from his seat, his massive form casting a shadow across the table as his deep voice rumbled through the room. Perhaps your calculations are simply wrong, Overseer, because numbers on a screen cannot capture the reality of combat. Our calculations are never wrong. Kethril snapped back, his calm composure cracking for just a moment before he regained control. The chamber fell into an uncomfortable silence as the representatives looked at each other with worry in their eyes. Far across the station, in a small observation room overlooking the stars, Commander Claire Morgan stood with her hands clasped behind her back and her gaze fixed on the infinite darkness beyond the window. She was 42 years old, with short brown hair that was starting to show traces of gray at the temples, and her face carried the kind of calm that only came from seeing too many things that most people never had to see. Admiral Nathan Price entered the room behind her, his footsteps soft on the metal floor as he came to stand beside her. They have been in there for 3 hours now, he said quietly, and I imagine they are still trying to figure out why their math does not work. Claire did not turn to look at him, but a small smile crossed her face for just a moment. Let them count and measure all they want, Admiral, because they will never find what they are looking for in their data. Nathan nodded slowly, understanding exactly what she meant. The Coalition has requested a demonstration of human combat capabilities, he told her, and they want you to participate in controlled testing at their facility. Now Claire did turn, and her dark eyes met his with a question in them. They want to put me in a box and see what I can do? Something like that, Nathan admitted with a sigh. Good, Claire said, and there was something in her voice that made Nathan feel a chill run down his spine. Because I think it is time they learned what they are really dealing with. Back in the council chamber, Yunshara was studying the human data with growing unease in her heart. She had spent years researching humanity, reading their history and learning their customs, and she knew things about them that most of her fellow representatives had never bothered to discover. She knew that humans came from a world that had tried to kill them every single day for millions of years. A world of predators and diseases and disasters that would have wiped out any other species. Long ago she knew that they had not just survived on that world, but had conquered it completely, rising from prey animals to the dominant life form through nothing but determination and the refusal to die, and she knew something else. Something that kept her awake at night when she thought about it too deeply. She knew that humans were afraid of almost nothing, because everything that could possibly frighten them had already tried to kill them back on Earth. "We should be careful," she said suddenly, interrupting an argument between Kethril and the Drefkai representative. "Because I do not think we truly understand what we are dealing with." Kethril turned his silver eyes toward her with annoyance clear on his face. "That is precisely why we need more data, Director. And that is precisely why we have requested this demonstration. And what if the demonstration shows us something we do not wish to see?" Yunshara asked quietly. The chamber fell silent again. And this time, the silence was heavier than before when Claire Morgan arrived at the council chamber an hour later. She walked in with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to fear. The representatives watched her with a mixture of curiosity and concern as she took her place at the center of the room. Her simple human uniform, a stark contrast to the elaborate clothing worn by the alien diplomats, Commander Morgan. Kethril began in his most official voice. "The Coalition thanks you for agreeing to participate in our research program. And we hope that this exercise will help us better understand human military capabilities." Claire looked at him for a long moment, and something in her gaze made the Veltari scientist take an involuntary step backward. "You want to understand humans?" she asked in a voice as calm as still water. "That is correct," Kethril replied. Trying to regain his composure, Claire nodded slowly, and when she spoke again, her words seemed to fill the entire chamber. "Then I hope you are ready to learn, Overseer, because the lesson I have to teach is not one you will ever forget." Yunshara felt her heart skip a beat as she watched the human woman standing alone in the center of the room, surrounded by representatives of 12 powerful species, and showing not even a trace of fear in that moment. She began to understand why the Coalition's math would never work, because whatever made humans dangerous could not be measured with numbers or captured in data. It was something else entirely. Something ancient and terrible and wonderful all at once, and they were about to see it for themselves. The testing facility occupied an entire section of the research station, and its walls were lined with sensors and cameras designed to capture every possible measurement. Thal stood in the observation room above the main testing floor, his 4 hands moving across control panels as he prepared the first series of evaluations. "We will begin with basic physical assessments," he announced through the communication system, including reaction time, spatial awareness, and tactical decision-making. Claire stood alone on the testing floor below, wearing simple exercise clothing and looking completely relaxed despite the dozens of sensors pointed at her from every direction. "Whenever you are ready, Overseer," she called up to him, her voice carrying easily through the large space. The first test was simple enough, requiring Claire to respond to visual signals by pressing corresponding buttons as quickly as possible. She completed it with good scores, better than average for most species, but nothing that would alarm the Coalition scientists watching from above. The second test measured her physical strength and endurance. And again, her results were solid but unremarkable. Letha recorded everything with careful attention, nodding to himself as the data confirmed what he had always believed about human limitations. "You see?" he said to Yunshara, who stood beside him in the observation room. "Humans are competent, but nothing special, and there is no mystery here. That cannot be explained by simple biology." Yunshara did not respond, but her eyes never left Claire on the floor below. The third test was more complex, a tactical puzzle that required the subject to navigate a maze while avoiding simulated threats that appeared at random intervals. Claire entered the maze with the same calm expression she had worn all morning, and for the first few minutes, everything proceeded exactly as expected. Then something strange began to happen. Claire started moving before the threats appeared, ducking behind cover seconds before simulated weapons fired at the space where she had just been standing. She turned corners and immediately raised her training weapon toward targets that had not yet become visible, firing the moment they appeared, as if she had known exactly where they would be in the observation room. Kethral's silver eyes widened as he watched his instruments struggle to explain what they were recording. "This is impossible," he muttered, his four hands flying across the control panels. "Because she's responding to stimuli before the stimuli occur. Perhaps your sensors are malfunctioning," suggested another Velthari scientist who stood nearby. "Our sensors do not malfunction," Kethral snapped. But even he did not sound convinced of his own words down on the testing floor. Claire completed the maze in half the expected time with a perfect score. And when she emerged, she was not even breathing hard. "Would you like me to do it again?" she asked, looking up at the observation room with something that might have been amusement in her dark eyes. Kethral ran the test again, and then again. And each time Claire performed this same impossible feat of responding to threats before they existed by the fifth run. The observation room had grown crowded with scientists and officials who had heard rumors of what was happening and come to see for themselves. Admiral Nathan Price stood in the corner, watching the chaos unfold with a knowing expression on his weathered face. "I warned them," he said quietly to Yunshara, who had moved to stand beside him, "that they were measuring the wrong things." "What do you mean?" she asked, genuinely curious. Despite her growing fear, Nathan gestured toward the testing floor, where Claire was calmly waiting for whatever came next. "They are measuring her body, her reactions, her physical capabilities, but that is not what makes her dangerous." "Then what is?" Yunshara pressed. Nathan was quiet for a moment before answering. "Humans did not survive on Earth because we were the strongest or the fastest. Director, because we were neither of those things." "And how did you survive?" "We survived because we learned to know when death was coming," Nathan said simply. "And we learned to move before it arrived." On the testing floor, Kethral's voice came through the speakers with barely contained frustration. "Commander Morgan, we need you to explain how you are anticipating the simulated threats, because our instruments show no evidence of cheating or hidden technology." Claire looked up at him and shrugged her shoulders. "I felt where they would come from," she answered. "That is not a scientific explanation." Kethral protested. "No," Claire agreed. "It is not." The testing continued for several more hours, and with each new evaluation, the Coalition scientists grew more confused and more afraid. Claire passed every test they designed, not because she was physically superior, but because she seemed to exist slightly ahead of time itself. When they tested her marksmanship, she hit targets before they finished appearing. And when they tested her hand-to-hand combat skills, she blocked strikes that had not yet been thrown by the end of the day. Kethral had accumulated more data than any previous study in Coalition history, and none of it made any sense. "We need a real test," he announced to the assembled officials, his voice tight with frustration. "Not these controlled simulations that she has somehow learned to predict." "What are you proposing?" asked the Drethkai representative, who had come to observe the afternoon sessions. "A live combat exercise against Coalition soldiers," Kethral answered, "because perhaps in a truly unpredictable environment we will finally see her real limitations." Nathan stepped forward immediately, his expression hardening. "I must object to this proposal, because putting a human officer in combat against multiple alien soldiers creates an unacceptable risk of injury. The exercise will use non-lethal weapons and protective equipment," Kethral assured him. "And we will stop immediately if anyone is in danger of serious harm." Before Nathan could argue further, Claire's voice cut through the debate. "I accept," she said simply. Everyone turned to look at her, standing alone on the testing floor with her hands clasped behind her back. "Commander, I must advise against this," Nathan said carefully. Your advice is noted, Admiral, Claire replied. But I think it is time these people understood what they are dealing with. And the only way to teach that lesson is to show them directly. Yunshara felt her heart racing as she watched the human woman agree to face multiple coalition soldiers in combat. Part of her wanted to stop this, to call off the entire experiment before someone got hurt. But another part of her, the part that had spent years studying humanity, wanted desperately to see what would happen next, because she was beginning to suspect that everything the coalition believed about humans was wrong, and she needed to know the truth, no matter how frightening that truth might be. The officials filed out of the observation room to prepare for the next day's exercise. Claire remained on the testing floor, her dark eyes staring at something none of them could see. Nathan paused at the door and looked back at her. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. Claire smiled. And for just a moment, there was something ancient and dangerous in that smile. They want to measure the weapon, she said softly, so let them try. The decommissioned cargo vessel had been converted into a combat arena, with its long corridors and empty storage rooms, providing the perfect environment for the exercise that was about to begin. 7 coalition soldiers stood at the main entrance, checking their equipment and reviewing their tactics one final time. 2 of them were Valkyrie operatives, tall and slender with silver skin and 4 arms each, trained in tactical combat since childhood and considered among the finest soldiers their species had ever produced. 3 were HFY warriors, massive creatures covered in natural armor plating, known across the galaxy for their incredible speed and strength that no other species could match. The remaining 2 were Talosi infiltration specialists, their pale blue skin able to shift colors slightly for camouflage, their movements silent and precise after years of specialized training together. They represented the elite of 3 different species, 7 against 1. And all of them were confident that this exercise would finally reveal the humans' limitations. In the observation room aboard the research station, dozens of officials watched through cameras that covered every inch of the arena. Kethral stood at the main console, his silver eyes fixed on the screens with eager anticipation. The rules are simple, he announced through the communication system. And the objective is to subdue the human without causing permanent harm. While she will attempt to do the same to you, Claire Morgan stood alone at the opposite end of the vessel, wearing light armor and carrying a standard sidearm loaded with stun rounds. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes for just a moment, centering herself the way she had done before every battle she had ever fought. When she opened her eyes again, there was something different about them, something older and more dangerous than the calm officer the Coalition had been testing all day. Begin. Kethral commanded. The Coalition soldiers moved into the vessel with practiced precision, spreading out to cover multiple approaches while maintaining communication through their helmet systems. The HFY took point, their armored bodies capable of absorbing most attacks, while their incredible reflexes allowed them to respond to threats faster than any other species. Behind them came the Valkyrie operatives, their 4 arms carrying multiple weapons and scanning devices that would detect any movement in the corridors. Ahead, the Talosi brought up the rear, their camouflage already activating as they prepared to flank. Any position the human might try to hold it was a perfect formation, developed through centuries of combined military experience and refined in countless training exercises. Claire did not hide from them. She did not run or seek cover or try to find a defensive position. Instead, she walked calmly through the corridors of the vessel, her footsteps echoing softly on the metal floor as if she were taking a peaceful stroll through a garden. The lead HFY spotted her first, his enhanced eyes picking up her movement from 50 meters away. Contact! He growled into his communicator, raising his weapon to fire, but Claire was already moving, sliding to the left before the HFY's finger even touched the trigger. his shot hit empty air. And by the time he adjusted his aim, she was gone. Vanished into a side corridor like smoke in the wind. Where did she go? Demanded one of the Valkyrie, her scanners showing nothing but empty space where the human had been standing moments before. Spread out and find her. The lead Drethkai ordered, his confidence slightly shaken by what he had just witnessed. The coalition soldiers separated into smaller groups, each one moving through the vessel with weapons ready and senses alert in the observation room. Kethral leaned forward with his silver eyes wide. She moved before he fired, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. But that should not be possible. Nathan Price stood in the corner of the room, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. He knew what was coming, and he knew that nothing in the Coalition's experience had prepared them for what they were about to witness. The first Talosi fell without a sound, her body crumpling to the floor as Claire appeared behind her like a ghost and pressed 2 fingers against a nerve cluster in her neck. The second Talosi spun around at the soft thud of her partner hitting the ground. But Claire was already there, moving inside the reach of her weapon and striking with precise, economical movements that dropped the infiltrator before she could cry out 2 down in less than 30 seconds. And the remaining 5 soldiers had no idea that anything had happened. The Valkyrie operatives moved through a storage area, their forearms sweeping the space with multiple weapons. While their scanners searched for any sign of the human, they found nothing until Claire dropped from a maintenance hatch above them, landing between them with the quiet grace of a falling leaf. One operative tried to bring her weapons around, but Claire caught 2 of her arms and twisted, sending the Valkyrie spinning into her partner. Before either of them could recover, Claire struck twice with her open palms, hitting pressure points that the Valkyrie did not even know they possessed. Both operatives collapsed, unconscious, before they hit the floor in the observation room. The officials were completely silent, their eyes fixed on the screens as they watched something they could not understand. 4 Coalition soldiers down, and the human had not fired a single shot. The 3 Drethkai had heard the commotion and were converging on the storage area, their massive forms thundering through the corridors with weapons raised and ready. They burst through the doorway to find their 4 allies lying motionless on the floor, and Claire standing in the center of the room, waiting for them. The lead Drethkai did not hesitate, lunging forward with the incredible speed that made his species the most feared warriors in the galaxy. He was fast, faster than any human could possibly react to, his armored fist swinging toward Claire's head with enough force to shatter stone. But Claire was not there. She had moved before his muscles even began to contract, stepping aside with a casual grace that made the Drethkai's attack look slow and clumsier. Hand touched his wrist as he passed, guiding his momentum and sending him crashing into the wall with a sound like thunder. The second Drethkai attacked from behind, but Claire spun and ducked under his strike, her foot sweeping his legs and dropping him to the floor. The third Drethkai roared and charged with both arms swinging, but Claire flowed around him like water around a stone, her fingers finding the gaps in his natural armor and pressing points that made his limbs go numb within 7 minutes of the exercise beginning. All 7 Coalition soldiers lay unconscious on the floor of the cargo vessel. Claire stood among them, her breathing steady and her dark eyes calm. She had not been touched, not once, and she had not even needed to use her weapon in the observation room. Kethral stared at his instruments, something close to horror in his silver eyes. Every sensor, every scanner, every piece of measuring equipment he had deployed showed him nothing useful, nothing that could explain how a single human had defeated 7 of the Coalition's finest soldiers without breaking. Sweet June Shara's voice broke the terrible silence. "Now do you understand?" she asked quietly, and nobody could answer her. The council chamber had never felt so small, and the representatives who filled it had never looked so afraid. Kethral stood at the center of the room with his 4 arms hanging limply at his sides, his silver eyes staring at the floor as if he could not bear to meet anyone's gaze. "I have reviewed the recording 17 times," he said in a voice that had lost all its earlier confidence. "And I have analyzed every piece of data from every sensor we deployed." He paused and took a breath that seemed to require great effort. "I have no explanation for what we witnessed." The Drethkai representative rose from his seat, his massive form trembling with barely contained fury. "Then perhaps you should admit that your precious scientific methods have failed," he thundered, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. "3 of my finest warriors were defeated by a single human, and you stand there telling us you have no explanation? What explanation would satisfy you?" Catherall asked wearily, "Because the data shows nothing. No hidden technology, no chemical enhancement, no telepathic abilities, nothing that should allow a human to do what she did. Then your data is wrong." The Drethkai insisted. "Our data is never wrong," Catherall replied. But this time, the words sounded hollow even to his own ear. Sion Chara watched the argument unfold with growing concern. Her pale blue hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had spent the night reviewing human history files, searching for something that might help her understand what she had witnessed. What she had found had only deepened her fear. Admiral Nathan Price stood near the door of the chamber, his weathered face calm and patient, as he waited for the officials to exhaust their anger. When the shouting finally died down, he stepped forward and cleared his throat. "May I speak?" he asked in a voice that carried easily despite its quiet tone. The representatives turned to look at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. "You may," said the council speaker. Elderly Talosi, whose voice trembled slightly, Nathan, walked to the center of the room and looked around at the assembled officials. "I understand that what you saw yesterday has frightened you," he began. "And I understand that you are searching for an explanation that fits within your understanding of the universe. Then, give us one." The Drethkai demanded. Nathan nodded slowly. "Commander Morgan has no enhancements of any kind," he said clearly, "and she carries no hidden technology that your sensors failed to detect." "Then how?" Catherall asked, his voice almost pleading. "She is a human," Nathan answered simply. "And what you witnessed yesterday is something that all humans possess to one degree or another." The chamber erupted in murmurs and whispers as the representatives struggled to process this information. "You expect us to believe that every human can do what she did?" the Drethkai asked incredulously. "Not to the same degree," Nathan admitted, "because Commander Morgan has trained for many years to develop her abilities. But yes, the potential exists in all of us." He paused and looked around the room with an expression of complete honesty. "Humanity evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years," he continued. "And we survived not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we developed something else." "What?" Anshara asked softly. "Instinct," Nathan said. "Intuition. The ability to sense danger before it arrives and react before our conscious minds even understand what is happening." Catherall shook his head in frustration. "That is not possible," he insisted, "because what you are describing would require the ability to predict the future, and no biological organism can do that." "We are not predicting the future," Nathan explained patiently. "We are reading the present so quickly and so deeply that we can see what is about to happen before it does." He gestured with one hand as he continued. "Every living creature broadcasts signals before it acts. Tiny movements of muscle and shifts of weight and changes in breathing that reveal their intentions. And humans have evolved to read those signals faster than conscious thought. But our soldiers are trained to suppress such signals," the Drethkai protested. "And a human who has mastered this ability can read the signals you do not even know you are sending." Nathan replied calmly. The chamber fell into a heavy silence as the implications of his words began to sink in. Finally, the council speaker rose from her seat, her aged body trembling, but her voice steady. "What do you want from us?" she asked, cutting through the fear with a question that demanded a practical answer. Nathan turned to face her directly. "Humanity does not want war with the Coalition," he said clearly, "and we have no desire to conquer or dominate other species." "Then why show us this?" Kethral demanded. "Why demonstrate a power that can only make us fear you more?" "Because you were already afraid," Nathan answered. "And fear of the unknown is far more dangerous than fear of the truth." He looked around the chamber with an expression of genuine sincerity. "We showed you what we are capable of because we want you to understand that humanity would make a far better ally than enemy." "And if we choose to become your enemy?" the Drethkai asked. His voice low and threatening. Nathan met his gaze without flinching. "Then I would ask you to remember what you witnessed yesterday," he said quietly, "and to understand that Commander Morgan is not even among humanity's best soldiers." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and several representatives actually recoiled as if they had been struck. "You are threatening us," the Drethkai accused. "No," Nathan replied, shaking his head. "I am giving you information that will help you make a wise decision." Yunshara rose from her seat, her pale blue skin seeming almost translucent in the chamber's light. "I have studied humanity for many years," she said, her voice carrying a weight that silenced the murmurs around her. "And I believe Admiral Price is telling the truth." She turned to face her fellow representatives. "Humans have never started a war of conquest against any alien species," she continued, "and every conflict they have been involved in was either defensive or in protection of others. That does not mean they will not attack in the future," the Drethkai argued. "No," Yunshara agreed, "but it does suggest that they prefer peace to war, and that alone should give us hope." The debate continued for hours, with representatives arguing for and against various responses to what they had learned. Some called for humanity to be declared a threat and contained before they could grow any stronger. Others argued for an immediate alliance that would bring human capabilities to the Coalition's defense, and still others suggested simply pretending that none of this had ever happened and hoping that humanity would leave them alone. Through it all, Nathan stood quietly and answered questions when asked, never raising his voice or showing any sign of anger or frustration. He knew that the Coalition needed time to process what they had learned, and he knew that pushing too hard would only make them more afraid. As the session finally drew to a close without any decision being reached, the chamber doors opened and a figure walked in that made everyone fall silent. Commander Claire Morgan entered the room with the same calm confidence she had shown since arriving at the station, her dark eyes moving across the assembled representatives as if she were taking their measure. "I have been listening outside," she announced, "and I think it is time I told you something myself." Nathan started to speak, but Claire raised a hand to stop him. "Let me do this, Admiral," she said quietly, "because they need to hear it from me." She walked to the center of the chamber and stood where she could see everyone clearly, and then she began to speak. The council chamber was completely silent as Claire Morgan stood at its center, her dark eyes moving slowly from one representative to the next. She did not speak immediately, allowing the weight of the moment to settle over the assembled officials like a heavy blanket. When she finally began, her voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the room. "You have spent 3 cycles trying to understand humanity," she said, "and you have measured everything you could think of measuring." She turned to face Kethral directly, and the Valkyrie scientists seemed to shrink under her gaze. "You counted our ships and cataloged our weapons and calculated the strength of our bodies. And when all your numbers told you we should be weak, you could not understand why we kept winning." Kethral opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. "The weapon you were trying to measure is not a thing," Claire continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. And it is not a gun or a ship or a bomb that you can weigh and count and put in your data files. She took a step closer to Kethril, and the scientist actually stepped backward without realizing he was doing it. It is something that lives inside every human being, she said. Something that whispers to us when danger approaches and tells us what must be done before our minds have time to think. The Drethkai representative leaned forward in his seat, his earlier anger replaced by something that looked almost like fascination. "What are you saying?" he asked in a voice that had lost all its threatening tone. Claire turned to face him. "I'm saying that your instruments will never capture what makes humans dangerous," she answered, "because it is not a signal or an energy field or anything that science can measure." She looked around the chamber at the faces of beings who had ruled the stars for thousands of years before humanity had even learned to make fire. "It is something older than your civilizations," she said. "Older than your species. Forged in millions of years of survival on a world that showed no mercy to the weak. Yunshar's voice broke the spell that had fallen over the chamber. "What do humans call this ability?" she asked softly. Claire smiled slightly, and there was something ancient and knowing in that smile. "We have many names for it," she replied. "And some call it intuition, while others call it gut feeling or sixth sense or combat instinct." She paused and let her gaze settle on each representative in turn. "But the truth is simpler than any name we give it." She walked slowly toward Kethril, who stood frozen in place as if his legs had forgotten how to move when she stood directly in front of him, close enough that she could have touched his face. She leaned forward and whispered words that only those nearest could hear. "They can strike before you stand." Kethril's silver eyes went wide, and he stumbled backward as if her words had been a physical. Below, the chamber erupted in murmurs and confused questions as representatives demanded to know what she had said. Claire raised her voice so that everyone could hear. "By the time an enemy decides to attack, a human already knows," she said clearly. "And by the time an enemy raises a weapon, a human has already moved." She turned slowly, addressing the entire assembly. "By the time an enemy fires, a human is no longer there." The Drethkai representative stood up, his massive form casting a shadow across half the chamber. "You are saying that you can sense our intentions before we act on them?" he asked. "I am saying that by the time you intend to act, it is already too late," Claire replied. "Because the moment your body begins to prepare for action, every human in the room will know." She walked back to the center of the chamber and stood where everyone could see her clearly. "This is why your simulations always fail," she explained. "Because you model what humans can do, but you cannot model what humans will do." Her voice softened but lost none of its power. "And there is a universe of difference between the two." Admiral Nathan Price stepped forward to stand beside her, his weathered face serious but not threatening. "We are not here to frighten you," he said. "And we are not here to make demands or issue threats." He looked around the chamber at the beings who held the fate of billions in their hands. "We are here to offer you a choice." Claire nodded in agreement. "Become humanity's ally," she said, "and gain the protection of a species that will sense danger before it arrives and stand with you against any threat." Her dark eyes hardened slightly. "Or become humanity's enemy," she continued, "and face a force that will always be one step ahead. Always know what you are planning before you plan it. Always strike before you can even begin to stand." The chamber fell into the deepest silence it had known since the session began. Representatives looked at each other with uncertainty and fear in their eyes, weighing options that might determine the future of their entire civilizations. Finally, the council speaker rose from her seat, her aged body trembling but her voice clear. "We will vote," she announced, "and let each species decide for themselves what path they wish to follow." The voting took less than an hour, with each representative casting their choice in turn while the others watched and waited when it was done. The speaker read the results in a voice that shook with something that might have been relief or might have been fear. 9 species had voted for alliance. 3 had voted for neither alliance nor conflict, choosing instead to maintain distance and observe. None had voted for wars. The session finally came to an end, and representatives began filing out of the chamber. Yunshara approached Claire with hesitation in her steps. "I voted for alliance," she admitted quietly. Claire nodded. "Unsurprised. I know," she said simply. Yunshara looked at her with something like wonder in her pale blue eyes. "You truly do not want to conquer the galaxy?" she asked. Claire shook her head slowly. "Humans have already conquered the only world that matters," she replied. "The one that tried to kill us for millions of years." She began walking toward the door, and Yunshara fell into step beside her. "Everything else," Claire continued as they walked, "is just making sure nobody else makes the same mistake Earth did." "What mistake is that?" Yunshara asked. Claire stopped at the doorway and turned to look back at the chamber, where 12 species had just chosen to stand with humanity rather than against it. When she answered, her voice was quiet but carried a weight that Yunshara would remember for the rest of her long life. "The mistake of thinking that humans can be defeated," Claire said. "Because we learned long ago that death comes for everyone eventually." She smiled. "And this time there was warmth in it alongside the ancient danger. We just learned how to make it wait." She walked out of the chamber and into the corridor beyond, leaving Yunshara standing alone in the doorway. The Talosi diplomat watched her go until she disappeared around a corner. And then she turned to look back at the empty council chamber where history had just been made. She thought about everything she had witnessed in the past few days. The tests and the combat demonstration and the revelation that had changed everything. And she realized that for the first time since learning about humanity, she was not afraid, because whatever weapon lived inside the hearts of humans, whatever ancient power whispered warnings of danger in their minds, it was now on her side, and that made all the difference in the universe.